Wednesday, the 12th of the 11th, 2025. The time is 10 minutes past 8, and that means, as always, one thing, that there are a multitude of F1 centric threads at which we need to pull 3 topics on the docket to cover over the next 25 minutes or less. Ted Kravitz on the Sky F1 show has chimed in around Lewis's future. Will they extend him? Will it really be a 2+1, or will it be 2 plus none? Lewis Hamilton potentially ending his contract with Scuderia Ferrari at the end of next year, not 27, to replaced by Ollie Bearman. So too we'll talk about Toto, the boy who cried wolf, and the sale of a percentage of his 33% stake over at Mercedes F1 to one George Kurtz. So too we've got to talk about Oscar Piastri, who's given an interview on Beyond the Grid to Tom Clarkson. In there he's talked about some stuff, weaknesses that he was fuming-ist off at McLaren on the back of Silverstone, on the back of Monza, going into Baku. And we'll dissect it. Charles Edward, you're a legend. I still believe in you, OJP. Flawless victory to come. Well, let's talk about it, mate, because he talks about habitual times that I know, Sir Charles, honestly, abhorrently late as usual. And I abhor lateness like you wouldn't believe. Go on, let's talk about Ted Kravitz in the first instance on one Sir Lewis Hamilton. You get the drill already. Over the past 48 hours, it has been chaos over at the red team with a yellow badge and the black prancing horse atop all season long. They can't get the car into the right operating window. They changed 99% of the components last year, when in Abu Dhabi race 24, they had the quickest car, for Pete's sake. They went and decided that they were going to bark, up a very ambitious design philosophy tree. And how has that ended for you, Frederick Vasseur? Adrian Newey, we don't need him. We're going to plough our own furrow. They said, just as the red team with the yellow badge and the black prancing horse tend to do. Stubbornness, that's the altar at which their 2025 campaign has fallen. Now it gets techier than techie things, because the drivers are done. They're vexed, they're fuming, they've had it up to here. They're going to speak their mind, and as well they might. Lewis Hamilton has been demanding X, Y and Z, wants the rigidity as far as the suspension at the rear. Where is that? Nowhere to be seen. Says he wants the snap oversteer dynamic handling dynamic dialed out of the SF25. Where's that? Nowhere to be seen. The pace of the car is nowhere. And again, it's temperamental and mercurial. Even Charles Leclerc, the prodigal son, can't drive it. And even he now, as subservient and as obedient as Charles Leclerc has been over his tenure at Ferrari, even Charles is speaking out about his disappointment, potentially looking at pastures anew by dint of Nicholas Todd and his management now having conversations with Aston Martin, Mercedes and Red Bull, for Pete's sake. If you lose Charles Leclerc, what do you think is going to happen next? Do you think Ollie Bearman can step into those Charles Leclerc shoes? I think not. Ted Kravitz has spoken about Lewis Hamilton, and again, the performance hasn't been great, but yet and still he's Sir Lewis Hamilton. Provide that dude with a car, and what do you think he's going to do with it? Lewis is begging you to take notes. I know what good looks like, Lewis Hamilton says, as far as the setup around Canada. And I watched the Ferrari boys try and set up the car, and it made no sense. Lewis Hamilton's words, not mine. So then take heed, or at least you think they might. They have not. The car is still a dog. They don't even want to pay any attention to Lewis Hamilton by dint of the 64 points that he's behind Charles Leclerc. And then you get John Alcan responding in kind to some of the comments that Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc made after this weekend's Brazilian Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton, you'll recall, said something to this effect: it was a dream to race for Ferrari, but the results have been a nightmare. Hyperbolic terms, potentially. Incendiary, absolutely. Passionate, you bet your bottom dollar. But what else do you think Sir Lewis Hamilton, 7-time champion, GOAT, first round Hall of Fame, is going to say? Charles Leclerc, to point, some say the quickest on the grid as at the time of writing, wasting away his prime years in Formula One in a red car that is not worthy of his not insubstantial talents behind a steering wheel. John Elkann, to those comments by Charles and Lewis, had this to say: we need some drivers that are focused on driving and talk less. What are you talking about, John Elkann? Tell me that you're not a leader without telling me that you're not a leader. Whatever happened to team morale? Whatever happened to being a pioneer, an innovator, no, a disruptor? Whatever happened to the era of Jean Todt, 2000 to 2004, when Ferrari couldn't lose a race? That's how dominant they are. People stopped watching Formula One because it was so monotonous at the altar of Scuderia Ferrari dominance. It's chaos. What did Alcon win for Ferrari? Absolutely nothing, Sharif. That's what he's won for Ferrari. Nothing. And I agree with you saying he needs to take 2 seats. Do you know what I mean? STFU, John Elkann. Again, what do you want from the team? Do you want them to win? Well, I think you made a point here, John Elkann, that the only reason why the Ferrari WEC team won is because of their unity. So engender that within the F1 team as opposed to going in front of the world's press and media and doing it anything but that fissure and fraction. That's what you're about, John Elkann. All you're concerned about is megalomaniac-esque power, which isn't going to win you races and therefore championships. This is chaos, chat. Absolutely chaos. But to that, Ted Kravitz went on the Sky Sports F1 show and he said a couple of different things. For the longest time, people have been debated if word on the F1 curb is something in which you want to be invested, how long the tenure of Sir Lewis Hamilton will be at Ferrari. Now, lest we forget, rumour is that he's got a 2+1 contract. Ergo, depending on performance clauses both ways, at the end of 26, he may extend for another year. But the guys and girls over at Fiorano, the Italian press and media, have been debating that the Ferrari engineers don't want Lewis to stay on, particularly not if he costs $70 million per year. And as at the time of writing, is 64 points behind Charles Leclerc and has only crossed the finishing line 3 times of 23 in front of the Monegasque modern day Jean Alesi. That's where it gets techier than techie things. That's why the Italian press and media respect Charles Leclerc for his moaning, because he's been driving the wheels off the car. They say that Sir Lewis Hamilton isn't worthy, that he doesn't have the gravitas nor performance behind him as grounding within which, on top of which, he can make such statements as it was a dream to race for Ferrari, but it's now a nightmare. To that, Ted Kravitz on the Sky Sports F1 show said there's speculation about Ollie Bearman replacing Sir Lewis Hamilton. It is now a matter of when and not if. Maybe it happens at the end of Lewis Hamilton's 2+1 contract, 2027. Maybe it happens at the end of next year, given the fact that Lewis Hamilton hasn't been performing. But what happens when ground effect goes away and it's active aero, 50% ice, 50% electric? What happens when they embed into the SF25 all of Lewis Hamilton's suggestions? Maybe we wake up and we see Sir Lewis of 2018 Singapore settings, 2010 fire-breathing dragon prime Sir Lewis Hamilton, or maybe we don't. Maybe it's 2025 and Formula One is a young man's game. Maybe it's one of those that we'll never see another 40-year-old champion in F1 like we did Jack Brabham in 1966, Farina in 1950 and Juan Manuel Fangio in 1957. Maybe Father Time in upper echelons of sports globally is now undefeated, undisputed, pound for pound, has never lost a round. Maybe, in which case Ferrari will suck off Sir Lewis Hamilton at the end of 26 and replace him with a resurgent Ollie Bearman. Let me chime in on this. Here's my thoughts. I think Ollie Bearman, by the fact that he's driving out of his skin, putting his teammate Esteban Ocon with his not insubstantial experience in the shade, that makes Lewis Hamilton's case more urgent now. Because Ollie Bearman is presenting Exhibit A, B, C and D, why they might want to promote him now. As at the time of writing, he looks ready to go, right? If you're talking about incremental improvement as versus a Lewis Hamilton now 64 points adrift of Charles Leclerc, surely you might contend that Ollie Bearman could have something to add to that Scuderia Ferrari equation. And they've done this before, haven't they? They like to farm off, I don't know, the next chosen one in Charles Leclerc, have him bed in and play his way into the Formula One crease as he did at Sauber. That's what they're doing with Ollie Bearman. They will bring him off the subs bench soon, forthwith. They will do it, especially if Sir Lewis Hamilton keeps underwhelming as far as his not insubstantial underperformance. Alcon and Hamilton deserve each other. Oh, the humanity, Johan. I don't know about that. What did Alcon win at Ferrari? Sharif said, I would concur with you. I think I think Alcon needs to understand what leadership looks like. But again, the article by Elizalde of Motorsport magazine told you that this is not new from Ferrari. Past his prologue, they've always done this. Arriva Bene did it. Stefano Domenicali did it to a lesser extent. Even Enzo Ferrari decided that to motivate the team, speaking negatively about them would get them in the right mindset. I would argue that it's 2025. That old school way of motivating, more stick than carrot, is played out. I don't think it's fit for purpose in 2025. The Sir Alex Ferguson model of managing players and drivers shortly thereafter, I think, is defunct. Ted Kravitz says that Ollie Bearman will definitely replace Sir Lewis Hamilton. You're just having a conversation about when. Will it be 2.7? Will it be 2.6? Will it even... No, they couldn't do it soon. 2.025? I don't think so. Go on then. Let me tell you about Toto, the boy who cried wolf. There was a brilliant article that I was going to bring up and walk through with you. However, it's gone away by De Kaiser. Again, all F1 journos are created equally, but some are created more equal than De Kaiser, as far as the Italian F1 media, is one of the good ones. In the article, he said the following. Now, a lot of speculation around the Toto, the boy who cried wolf sale has been made. Christian Horner, desperately seeking some equity. Surely he couldn't possibly team up with Toto Wolff at the boys and girls for Brackley and Bristol. Surely not. But you forgive my apophony, connecting causation dots that have no right to be connected. The Kaiser sets me straight though, and he says that the person buying the stake in Mercedes F1 AMG by dint of Toto the boy who cries wolf's umbrella company is one called George Kurtz. He's the founder and CEO of IT company CrowdStrike, long-term sponsor of Mercedes AMG F1, official sponsor even, that he'll buy 5%, which will cost him €261 million, a stake in Mercedes F1 team through Toto the boy who cried wolf's holding company. What does this mean then? Some have speculated that this is potentially the start of the end for Toto, that for the longest time since 2021 and Michael Massey-gate, that Toto's been dying to take a step back. You see him now, no longer does he attend every Grand Prix as a ritual. Sometimes he's at home, sometimes he's got to take the little one to karting. He's a family man now, more than some say he's a racing man, more than he's even committed to Mercedes F1 AMG. And I can forgive him that. He's a businessman, a billionaire for Pete's sake. He's got other things to do with his time. He cannot, no, will not be in F1 in perpetuity for the rest of his life. The Kaiser in his article continues that this is going to mean that Toto, nothing for now is going to change as far as Toto, the boy who cried wolf's role. He will still be team principal, CEO, a majority shareholder, 33%, still as near as Nate's no difference. And so therefore a decision maker. Here's what De Kaiser says. Mercedes team would thus be valued by dint of the 261 million purchase of 5%. Mercedes will be valued at approximately $6 billion, just over 5 billion euros. What are we doing here, chap? Listen, I understand that a rising commercial tide floats all F1 boats, but that is chaos. That's world record settings. Now, McLaren have just gone through whatever they've gone through, selling off a portion which valued them circa 4.3 billion. Mercedes F1 now valued at $6 billion, 5 billion euros. That is chaos. Make sure you send Drive to Survive a thank you Christmas card. Toto, the boy who cried wolf. Also, Auto Racer is what they had to say. They're going to have spelled it incorrectly. I've just seen that your boy's got dyslexia on Twitter. Shout out to De Kaiser. He said that Toto's also considering his next move. Again, he's a 4D chess player, is Toto. Do you know what I mean? He's playing 4 and 5 moves ahead of the game strategically. There is chatter now about Toto, the boy who cried wolf, potentially becoming a Liberty Media CEO. What are we doing? The next Stefano Domenicali. Now, I've heard Toto talk about this before, that he's keen to get more involved with F1 and its commercial arm. But imagine if Stefano Domenicali steps down and Toto, the boy who cried wolf, replaces him. Oh, the humanity. That is chaos and carnage. A chaos dragon, if ever I saw one, for which we needed to slay. Toto CEO of Liberty Media. Surely some would say that there is a conflict of interest. Well, Jean Todt was it before, not of the commercial arm, of course, of the FIA, the regulatory body. It's techie. Shawnee, you're a legend. Have you watched the Conor Moore Brazil? I have. I don't watch Conor, sadly, Shawnee. You boys out here trying to cover serious news rather than watching memes, although we may do that at some stage. Oh, and by the way, let's get into the meat of it, because Oscar Piastri has given an interview with Tom Clarkson Beyond the Grid. I will link it in the description because you guys should go and watch it in full. Again, the context is this. Oscar Piastri, during the first 9 races of the season, was god tier. Absolute genius, settings, 4 poles, 5 race wins. In the subsequent 11, nowhere near good, sir. 2 poles and 3 wins, I want to say, or 1 pole and 2 wins. He's been nowhere near. The last 4 races, no podiums of which he can speak. The trend, some say, is your friend until there is a bend. And oh, for sure, there has been a bend in Oscar Piastri's performance. But why? Well, Tom Clarkson pieces, as he does, picks and jabs at it with a view to get us closer to the F1 truth. No longer abbots of unreason on the distance on the sideline. Here's what they talk about. We'll play some clips. In the first instance, lest we forget, OJP, for whatever you want to say about his form, has always been a god tier overtaker. Knows how to make a move and stick for it. Forensic, some say, as far as his car placement. And he was early on in the season, but something's happened. In the first instance, Tom Clarkson asked the questions. Talk to me about your overtaking. All F1 drivers are created equal, but some are created more equal than others. And do you, Oscar Jack Piastri, treat them as such? Roll the clip.
So you treat drivers differently? A little bit, yeah. It's normally if they're at kind of one end of the scale. You know, if you know that they're going to make life incredibly tough for you, then yeah, you probably think about things a bit harder. And if you know, not that there's really anyone easy to overtake in F1, but if you know that they're going to be a bit nicer to you and give you a bit more space, then you also think about that. So it depends on a lot of things. I think ultimately it's kind of down to how much risk are you willing to take and what's the reward going to be. And, you know, in a lot of scenarios, maybe you don't think about the risk that much, but you just think about the reward. But having some kind of sense of that balance is obviously very important. But ultimately, it is down to feel and kind of instinct and knowing what you think the other guy's going to do. Are they going to brake earlier and try and, you know, cover the inside? Are they going to try and really go in deep so you can't go around the outside? And some of that is guesswork, or a lot of that is guesswork, but kind of reading the situation quickly, assessing your chances of whether you think you can pull it off or not, and then ultimately, if you think you can make it work, you have to commit to it.
And that's something that Oscar Piastri is good at, right? Lest we forget overtaking manoeuvres at Baku on Charles Leclerc 2024. Overtake of the year, some say. Similar sort of situation at the Monza Italian Grand Prix, chicane number 2, again on his teammate, putting one round the outside where you're not supposed to be able to overtake. Similar story at Miami this year, Maximilian Verstappen. And I say all of that to say this, notwithstanding his downturn in form over the past 4 or 5 races, Oscar Piastri yet and still is a god tier overtaking F1 driver, super aggressive, cut from the same mould as an Ayrton Senna or a Danny Rick or a Michael Schumacher or a Lewis Hamilton or even a Maximilian Verstappen. And hearing him, the adaptability, his ability to change his mindset, the way he overtakes depending upon who he's overtaking, is that point manifest, is it not? Then we talk about, and again the context for this one is important, you'll be aware that over the past couple of Grand Prix, Mark Hughes of Motorsport magazine has written a couple of different articles trying to explain away the sudden material downturn in Oscar Piastri's form. He writes that around Mexico, a low grip track, that Oscar Piastri's driving style wouldn't suit it. The track will take longer to bed in. It will suit, therefore, a slide merchant like Lando Norris, who's more overlappy in terms of his throttle and brake. input. Some said this is nonsense from Mark Hughes. What's he talking about? That Oscar Piastri is just as overlappy in terms of his braking and throttle inputs as Lando Norris. Well, let's hear what the man himself has to say. Tom Clarkson asked him the question, and this is how OJP responds. Roll the clip.
Some people are very, very active on the brake pedal.
What do you mean by that?
They're very quick in kind of adjusting their brake pressure through a stop. And, one thing is...
Are you active?
I would say no. I think one, there's kind of a few ways of doing things. Obviously judging, how to get to the apex in the best way possible, the fastest way possible when you're going from 300 to 80, for example. Trying to judge that distance is not very straightforward. And, some people are better at kind of not picking the perfect braking point, but then being able to manage all the way to the apex. Some people are better at picking the right braking point and then kind of maximizing what you have to get to the apex. And both of those kind of approaches have strengths and weaknesses, I would say. I think for me, it's... normally my driving style is pretty smooth with a lot of things. And braking is generally one of those things. But there are strengths and weaknesses with that. Sometimes that works massively in my favor, because if I get to the right place, or when I get to the right place, then I can be incredibly consistent. But if you need to change things up a little bit, or things are a bit unpredictable, then, I have to work a bit harder to try and adjust to that, let's say. So, it's all quite interesting how some people...
He therefore, Oscar Piastri, has one style. Everything needs to be perfect. He's not the dude that's going to adapt mid-corner. He needs to nail the braking point and the turn in every single lap the same way. Just told you as much. His words, not mine, that I'm not as active on the brake as some others. Mention no names. Lando Norris with his overlappy driving style, especially around the Mexican Grand Prix, which is super low grip. Therein lies your answer. That's part of the causation, the explanation as to where Oscar Piastri's form has gone. Around low grip tracks, his driving style being super linear, less overlappy, less slidey, less managing of the adapting circumstances around the Mexican Grand Prix, is never going to be as best suited to a Mexican Grand Prix circumstance as Lando Norris or a Maximilian Verstappen chaos. Whole lot of I don't know, never explain yourself. So if it was me, I'm yelling sabotage, says Charles Edward. We'll get to it, mate, because he speaks to it. And BC legend, and you're a legend as always, Sir Charles Edward Cheese. I appreciate you ad infinitum ad nauseum. BC2 says, would Lando taking number one on the car be a bad joke? Oh, the humanity, BC. Well, we're going to see in a couple of races time, right? Ultimately, I think that's not the least likely outcome. Also, Tom Clarkson in the Beyond the Grid interview, again, link will be in the description, speaks to Oscar Piastri and his missteps. Mention no names: Baku, the British Grand Prix, the Australian Grand Prix as well. He was, as near as makes no difference, perfect earlier on in the season, apart from the aforementioned examples. Clarkson pitches that as a question to OJP, and his response looked and sounded something like this. Roll the clip.
Step you've taken from 24 into 25, but can we also now look at, and I'm quoting you, some of the bumps in the road that there have been this year? Some of those have been just frustrating things not related to pace. I'm thinking of the safety car transgression at Silverstone. Really frustrating. When you think back to that now, are you still or how quickly do you dwell on things like that?
That one definitely hurt for a little bit. But I think by the time we got to the next race, I'd moved on from it. Obviously when you look back at anything, there's still going to be some residual emotion there, whether it happened 10 years ago or 2 weeks ago. But I think for me, I think it very much depends on how you deal with it. I think if you just let it kind of take control of you, or you don't do anything to address it, and you kind of, like Silverstone, for example, if I had have just sat there going, I think that was a crap decision, I don't agree with it, that's stupid, and just sat on that, then, it probably would still hurt a lot to this day. But I think when you look back at it and go, yeah, okay, maybe still don't agree with the decision, but there's this I could have done differently, there's this that could have happened a bit differently, and kind of, and also just dealing with the emotion of it, like, is being upset with this going to help me? Is it going to fuel me for the next race? Or is it just going to keep me off?
Did you check the expletive? Hissing me off with a P at the start. He said also a couple words jump out the page at me as far as Oscar's stanza. Him talking extemporaneously about the downturn in his performance. Do you recall that he said, of course, there's going to be some residual emotion, and with that, Oscar Piastri, there will be some downstream ramifications to the downside as far as your performances. He says that, okay, so he's got to deal with it. That's the exam answer, but that it's there and that he's struggling with it jumps off the page, ladies and gentlemen. Tell us that there is residual, that there is emotional turmoil and trauma potentially, Oscar Piastri, associated with perceived favouritism or not, or otherwise, without telling us. The Charles Edward, you're a legend. Lando should take number 1 and put Simply Lovely in a script beneath it. Helmet should read. Oh my gosh, Sir Charles, you're a legend. Helmet should read Lando Norris. Oh, the humanities, Charles. Can you imagine if he did that? Listen, I mean, it more than likely it will read number 1 in there. I think that's interesting from Oscar Piastri, the way that he talks about that there is legacy, almost as if he's telling us that he hasn't gotten over a Baku, nor did he get over Silverstone, nor did he get over the switcheroony at the Italian Grand Prix.
Identifying which of those two things it's going to do and then doing something about it, that's a really important thing for me. And I think generally in the times where you sit on things and bottle it up to an extent, that's when the emotions can be a bit overwhelming.
I feel like that dude's describing everything that he's going through in real time, given it's his championship time, given it's the drivers, and given it's his first time round, his 3rd season in Formula 1. And these are the championship rounds, by the way, races at which Oscar Piastri has never gone super well, particularly if you're talking Vegas and Abu Dhabi. Qatar, 2nd and a 3rd, take that. But what about the rest? He's going to need to be as near as makes no difference perfect. He's going to overcome the deficit to his teammates Lando Norris, and then Tom Clarkson gets techier than techie things and asks him about the circumstance that was Baku, his lowest ebb, his troughiest of trough moments. Roll the clip.
Baku.
Yeah.
You had such a brilliant weekend there last year. One of the best wins of your Formula 1 career. This year didn't go so well. Do you understand now the reasons why?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately a combination of quite a few things. Obviously the race before that was Monza, which I didn't feel was a particularly great weekend from my own performance, and there was obviously what happened with the pit stops, but then also in Baku itself, Friday was tough. Things weren't working. I was overdriving. I wasn't very happy with how I was driving, and ultimately probably trying to make up for that a little bit on Saturday.
In fact, you were purple in quali until you went into the war, weren't you? So I suppose I'm asking, after the success of what happened there in 24, did you go there in 25 maybe with too much confidence? Is that possible?
I don't think so. I wasn't really, obviously I had good memories of Baku from last year, but I knew, that didn't guarantee me anything at all for this year at Baku. I think there was kind of some things in the lead up, let's say, that were maybe not the most helpful, and then things that happened on the weekend. We had a engine problem in FP1 that kind of unsettle things a bit. Then I was driving not that well. The car, we were on the C6 tyres that weekend, which are now notoriously tricky to handle. There was just a lot of little things that eventually kind of added up. And, ultimately I felt like on Saturday my pace was very good, but I was just trying a bit too hard.
Oscar says there were a lot of little things that led up to Baku, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, that ultimately affected his performance, which, lest we forget, was a cheeky false start moment and then yeeting it into the barrier again, the second day consecutively in 2 days. That, ladies and gentlemen, is chaos. Oscar Piastri desperately wants to toe the party line here. Exam answers and questions that's his modus operandi, but I feel like he's leaking when he says there were various things that happened in the lead up to. You will recall that the Grand Prix before Azerbaijan was, of course, Monza, the Italian Grand Prix, lest we forget. And at that Grand Prix, McLaren had asked in qualifying Oscar Piastri in Q2 to tow his teammate. Tell me, therefore, that you want Lando Norris to win the championship without telling me tow who. For what? I would have said that's what Oscar Piastri wanted to say. You saw Oscar Piastri rip out his headphones when Zak Brown wanted to celebrate over the radio the Constructors' Championship after they just inverted a circumstance that needed no intervention. They'd said previously in the pre-race debrief, in the pre-race brief even, that slow pit stops are part of racing. That's what Oscar Piastri said over the radio. So why then are you inverting unless Lando is your favourite? Now, we've had this conversation ad nauseum now. Actus reus is something that I can prove. Sagan's standard dictates that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence to justify them. The latter we don't have, sadly. But mens rea, motivation for Mr. Commercial, Lando Norris, Ralph Lauren advert, OKX, Wallet X, all of the adverts that they put him in front of, Hilton hotels, etc., etc. How can you see all that in real time if you are Oscar Piastri? How can you see Lando Norris benefit from a cheeky invert position team order and not feel aggrieved? And I think that's what Oscar Piastri is telling us here. I think he's saying that Baku is directly linked to what happened only one race weekend previous at the Italian Grand Prix. Now substantially behind his teammate Lando Norris, now set to finish second in his maiden run. I think it's techier than techie things for Oscar Piastri, and I'm not sure that this is the last that we're going to hear of it. In that Beyond the Grid interview, there is a link in the description. Go and watch it in full. Don't take my word for granted. Trust but verify here. Listen to it. Hear what he's saying and check out his demeanour and countenance, because I think Oscar Piastri is none too pleased with the leadership at McLaren because of what he perceives, at the very least when perception is reality, to be Lando Norris' favouritism. Lest we forget, Zak Brown is a mega commercial mind, and he'll be acutely aware more than most of the power and commercial upside that comes with Lando Norris, his cheeky smile, the glint in his eye that comes with him winning a Drivers' Championship, as opposed to Oscar Jack Piastri. He will get techier than techie things over the next 3 races, and I'm here for it. How, ladies and gentlemen, do you like yourselves, therefore? Some F1.